He is an articulate spokesman for those far left views. The last thing we need to do is to monkey this up by trying to embrace a socialist agenda.
That was Ron DeSantis speaking about his Democratic opponent, Andrew Gillum, at the beginning of the Florida gubernatorial race. Well, many saw the comment as a critical error, with Republicans suggesting he misspoke and Democrats claiming it was a racist dog whistle. The comment, as it turns out, fell short of preventing this from happening.
About 15 minutes ago, I spoke with Andrew Gillum, and he very graciously conceded the election.
By the way, Gillum has since retracted that concession, but is still considered unlikely to win the recount. So it would be perfectly reasonable to argue that DeSantis was able to overcome the misstep as Floridians were more interested in other subjects surrounding the race, like policy. Sure, you could argue that the mainstream media was wrong in posting article after article about the incident and asking Andrew Gillum about it in interviews repeatedly. Maybe Gillum was right to say this.
We've got to make sure that we stay focused, I think, on the issues that confront everyday people. I'm not going to get down in the gutter with DeSantis and Trump.
Well, actually, it's really difficult to argue that the comment was irrelevant. The media had a lot of reason to talk about the incident, as Shep Smith explained at the time.
There has been a bubbling on the internet. It's trending. It's at the top of most political websites.
So was Ron DeSantis' poor choice of words an early obstacle he was able to eventually overcome? Or was the comment, or more specifically the reaction it sparked, actually beneficial to his campaign? And if the comment did counterintuitively help the DeSantis campaign, can the Democrats learn from this?
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
Either the thing is true or it isn't. If it is true, you should believe it, and if it isn't, you shouldn't.
I am the least anti-Semitic person that you've ever seen in your entire life.
They want to wipe out the fact that 5 million children in this country go to bed hungry.
Our nation is waging a war on a radical network of terrorists, not on a religion.
Nevertheless, she persisted.
And then we fell in love. Okay? No, really.
I'd like to thank our president for standing by me when it wasn't necessarily the smart thing to do.
It's no surprise that DeSantis found time to thank the president in his victory speech.
It wasn't necessarily the smart thing to do.
As his political ads made clear, he's a devout fan of President Trump.
Build the wall. Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired. Make America great again." Big league. So good.
But the president didn't just help DeSantis by being a replacement for early childhood education. He also supported him fiercely. He campaigned for him, even going so far as to call him a
true leader, a proud veteran, my great friend, a tough, brilliant cookie.
Trump also supported his cookie friend via his great words on the most presidential social media platform you have ever seen.
Not only did Congressman Ron DeSantis easily win the Republican primary, but his opponent in November is his biggest dream.
On top of that, I believe that Donald Trump gave DeSantis the political strategy that won him his election. My sense of it is that the monkey comment was pivotal in the race, and far from hurting DeSantis, the reaction to the comment actually helped secure his seat as governor of Florida. Now, because I can't read minds, I can't prove that the governor said the monkey thing on purpose. In fact, if he did say it intentionally, that's part of the strategy. Again, because I can't read minds, I also don't know whether or not DeSantis is a racist. But if the Republican line on the issue is correct, it's actually far more likely. Remember, their claim is that he said monkey it up rather than muck it up, and monkey just slipped out. Kind of hard not to think, if that were the case, that it was a Freudian slip. But I don't think that DeSantis is necessarily racist, because I think he said it on purpose. Beyond that, I don't think that if he did say it on purpose, that it was just to dog whistle to racists. I believe that he said it to cause a reaction that would give him favorability for everyday run-of-the-mill Floridians, who not only are not hardcore racists, but are terrified about the idea of being called a racist. Whether DeSantis followed this strategy on purpose or not, here's how the issue played out. You be the judge of whether this just happened to go this way or whether this was an instance of Republicans outfoxing Democrats with a clever trick. I think it's a strategy, so I'll present it that way, but keep in mind, totally valid if you think it's just a bunch of stuff that happened. So if you think that's the case, go ahead and think about it that way. It doesn't really change the point that I'm circling to. Okay, so the first thing that happened here was DeSantis saying something ambiguously racist. Recall exactly what he said.
So we've got to work hard to make sure that we continue Florida going in a good direction. Let's build off the success we've had on Governor Scott. The last thing we need to do is to monkey this up by trying to embrace a socialist agenda with huge tax increases.
So he didn't say something outright clearly racist, like calling his opponent a monkey. He just used the word awkwardly, misusing the phrase muck it up, which really draws some special attention to the word. Now, depending on who you are, you will interpret what he said totally differently. If you are a hardcore white supremacist who loves hearing a connection drawn between blacks and monkeys, you will hear the dog whistle. That's not particularly relevant because I believe that really most Floridians are not part of this category, otherwise why would they have voted for Obama twice? But a far larger group of people who will hear the ring of racism here are the people who will be disgusted by it. People who are all too familiar with the ugly history of portraying blacks as monkeys, older images like these, and more recent ones like these. The people who would pick up on this would likely include most blacks, as well as most liberals, progressives, social justice warriors, academics, mainstream media figures, in other words, the woke people. This leads us to step 2. Unsurprisingly, the comment received no shortage of reaction from the so-called liberal media, with headlines like DeSantis warns Florida not to monkey this up, and many hear a racist dog whistle, that's from the New York Times, and Ron DeSantis' monkey comment was just the start of his racist dog whistling, that's from the Washington Post. Democratic operatives down the line made hay of what they thought was a misstep, with, for example, Florida Democratic Party Chairwoman Terry Rizzo putting out a statement saying, "It's disgusting that Ron DeSantis is launching his general election campaign with racist dog whistles." The Democratic Governors Association Deputy Communications Director David Turner echoed similar thoughts, saying, "On the first day of the election, Ron DeSantis showed Floridians who he really is." Gillum was himself asked about the comment repeatedly, and while maybe not going too hard after DeSantis, he did take the bait.
We're better than this in Florida. I believe the congressman can be better than this. I regret that his mentor in politics is Donald Trump.
He even went on Shep Smith's show so Fox viewers could see him responding to the comment this way.
Was that racist or a figment of speech?
Well, in the handbook of Donald Trump, they no longer do whistle calls. They're now using full bullhorns.
But while all this was happening, of course, the DeSantis campaign was putting out a message of its own, which brings us to step 3. DeSantis would walk back the comment most prominently during an appearance on Sean Hannity's show.
It has zero to do with race, Sean. It has everything to do with whether we want Florida to continue to go in a good direction.
So after saying something that predictably made the left focus on racism and dog whistles and called DeSantis a racist, DeSantis himself would claim that this has nothing to do with that and he wants to focus on the issues. Now, both candidates say that they want to talk about the issues, but only one wants to talk about race. The effect of this clarification is made ever more strong when step 4 comes into play. Banking on the walk back, DeSantis supporters would make appearances defending him on cable news. Here's former Trump advisor Michael Caputo speaking on DeSantis' behalf.
I don't think Ron DeSantis meant anything by that. I think he chose the wrong word. One of the first things these, social justice warriors do is call out racism, even where it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And for all those labeling DeSantis a racist, Caputo has a label of his own, one often applied to Trump's critics.
Trump derangement syndrome.
Now, with DeSantis walking his comments back and Republican allies pointing to that fact, the people of Florida were left to choose between whether they want to support the guy who maybe said something racist, which he says he didn't mean, or the guy who was criticizing him for saying something he then retracted. This is the real genius of the strategy. So as we've seen hardcore racists see a black man on one side and a guy who's potentially racist white man on the other, so they side with DeSantis. Most blacks, social justice warriors, and educated elites see a racist on one side and a non-racist on the other, so they support Gillum. But what about everyone else? People who don't generally get too deep into politics. People in the middle of the political spectrum. Well, there's a key principle at play here, and I want to spell it out for you. In America, being called a racist is generally seen as far worse than being a racist. Most Americans do not see themselves as racist. Fun fact for you, the former Grand Wizard of the KKK, David Duke, does not see himself as a racist. Seriously, he actually said that. Now, if you're not a racist, it obviously does not feel good to be called a racist. Most Americans are extremely afraid of being called racist. This is a fear that right-wing politicians and pundits play on constantly. Take, for instance, Tommy Lahren tweet about Robert De Niro. This is effective not because people are ready to villainize Robert De Niro. Most are perfectly capable of looking past his painful foray into comedy and remember the good old days when he mainly played lovable criminals. The attacks against people who call people racist succeed because most Americans fear being called racist themselves, and some can even empathize with this guy. Americans desperately fear being considered racist, or for that matter, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, ethnocentric, or any other form of being a bigot when they did not mean to say anything wrong. This is one reason why Americans overwhelmingly do not like political correctness. One study that actually bothered to delve into this found that 80% of Americans believe that political correctness is a problem in our country. And by the way, this is not a particularly white point of view. That same study found that whites consider it a problem slightly less than average at 79%, while Asians, Hispanics, and American Indians fear political correctness at higher levels. As one, by the way, non-white person quoted in the study claimed, "It seems like every day you wake up, something has changed. Do you say Jew or Jewish? Is it a black guy, African American? You are on your toes because you never know what to say, so political correctness, in that sense, is scary." Similar statements can be found in the comment section on the Fox Business video that I cited earlier. So given all that, how would you expect a person in the non-politicized middle to react to this controversy? Will they choose to support the guy who might have been attacked by a racial slur, or support the guy who is definitely called a racist after he walked back his maybe racist statement? Well, we know the answer.
Andrew Gillum, and he very graciously conceded the election.
Key in this strategy is changing the discussion to one over political correctness. But to accomplish that, the dog whistle has to be just right. It actually doesn't matter if you get the approval of radical racists or not. What you have to do is trigger the social justice warriors. But you also have to have enough plausible deniability so that you can later clarify that you meant nothing by it. All the while, the left is calling you something that most people are afraid of being called themselves, so that pundits and supporters can drum up support based on that fear. DeSantis in no way invented this strategy, and while dog whistles have been around in American politics for a very long time, there's one man I imagine DeSantis was inspired by.
I know nothing about David Duke. I know nothing about white supremacists. And so you're asking me a question that I'm supposed to be talking about people that I know nothing about.
They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're rapists. We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. On many sides.
In all these cases, the left gets rightfully angry about his comments. Why is he pretending he doesn't know who David Duke is when he clearly did? Why is he calling undocumented immigrants drug-toting criminal rapists? Why does he blame all sides for Charlottesville after a white supremacist murdered Heather Heyer? At the same time, he leaves just enough space for his supporters and moderates to get angry about Trump being called a racist when he didn't explicitly say anything racist. In the case of David Duke, he would later disavow him. In the case of immigrants, he would include this little statement.
And some, I assume, are good people.
Also, his supporters would rightly claim that he was only talking about illegal immigrants, not all immigrants and not all Latinos. And that means it's not technically racist. In the case of Charlottesville, his supporters could easily point out that Antifa does also have a history of violence, or argue that not everyone who wanted to keep up the Confederate statues was necessarily racist. In fact, that's exactly how Bannon reframed the discussion.
What he's saying is that the discussion about the Confederate monuments, whether Confederate monuments should be covered, whether the Confederate monuments should be removed, there are people on both sides, and that's their First Amendment right to debate that.
Now, the fact that there's sort of a pattern here between what Trump consistently does and what DeSantis did. That's why I assume that it is a strategy. But like I say, it doesn't really actually matter. Either it's a strategy that Republicans are intentionally pursuing, or it's just a pattern that's just going to happen over and over and over again naturally, and they didn't intend on doing it. Either way, it's something that Democrats should learn to respond to, and something that so far they haven't really figured out. So how should Democrats respond to Trump's dog whistle playbook? I'm not sure I know fully, but I do have a couple of suggestions. First, don't feed the trolls. If this is an intentional strategy, the Trump Republicans want you to call them racist so that they can call you politically correct. They win that battle every time. Instead, point out their retraction and agree with them. Say something like, my opponent has issued a clarification on what he meant. He says he misspoke. I'm happy he retracted this statement and apologized. I agree it wasn't a good choice of words. That way, the emphasis is actually on the fact that the Republican had to backtrack on what they said. It makes them look like clumsy blunderers, and you look like a reasonable, forgiving person. Second, pull out the old gem that the Republicans used to use against Obama, specifically the claim, he says he's a Christian, and I believe him. Say, he says he's not a racist, and I believe him. The progressive left will know what you mean. He's racist, but you're not going to get down in the dirt. You want to focus on the issues. Now, obviously, this is not a complete strategy for dealing with this kind of trolling, but hopefully you guys can provide some good ideas in the comments section down below. I look forward to reading your comments, but even if you do come up with a brilliant strategy to counter Trump's dog whistling, we will be forced to ask this question.
My great friend, a tough, brilliant cookie.